Good morning and welcome to this week's Whole School Assembly, which is on the theme of Knowing Yourself, Unconscious Bias. Every week our assemblies are inspired by some religious quotes. This week's religious quote comes from Christianity, and it says the following: God never said that the journey would be easy, but he did say that the arrival would be worthwhile. This links to today's assembly, as the journey to self-awareness is a tough one, but it is one that is extremely valuable to both you and those around you. This week's assembly also links to our fourth Art Putney Academy value, and that is that a sense of self-awareness combined with the integrity to be compassionate towards others is most important. Part of understanding our unconscious bias is that we can become more self-aware of how we respond towards others and how we can become more compassionate and leading to a greater sense of community. So some of you may be already aware of what unconscious bias is, but it is when we make judgments or decisions on the basis of our prior experience or our own personal deep-seated thought patterns, assumptions, or interpretations. Unconscious bias is something that we are all guilty of, and we're not aware that we're necessarily even doing it. In your groups now, I'll give you 1 minute to discuss how is unconscious bias different to somebody being racist or sexist. There are many differences between unconscious bias and overt forms of discrimination like racism or sexism in our communities. When somebody makes a racist remark, for example, they're intending to cause harm to another person. And this is clear to other people around them, so we all know that that person is behaving in a way that is not appropriate, and it can therefore be sanctioned. Unconscious bias, however, often occurs without the harmful intent. People are often unaware they're even doing it. But the problem of unconscious bias is that if it is left unchecked, this can easily lead us into lazy stereotypes and, at worst, prejudicial or discriminatory behaviours towards certain groups of individuals. Psychology has shown us that there are 4 main types of unconscious bias. Each of these affect our behaviours and our interactions around other people in our community. The more we can be aware of them, the more we can understand how they affect our interactions and our behaviours, and hopefully change them. The first type of bias is affinity bias. This is where we feel a strong connection to people who are similar to us. For example, treating students who go to the same school as you better than those who don't. Perception bias involves developing stereotypes and assumptions about different groups of people. This can be based on their skin colour, their age, their ability status, or their gender. For example, somebody who is elderly at work might be treated differently to somebody young. People might have stereotypes about the fact that they cannot work with a computer successfully. The halo effect is when we project positive qualities onto people without actually knowing them. It is a type of unconscious bias where we may think people are better than they actually are, simply because of the way that they look. And finally, confirmation bias is when we look to confirm our own opinions and pre-existing ideas. This means that we wouldn't listen to anything that goes to the contrary. For example, if somebody presents evidence that smoking causes cancer, somebody who is a smoker may look to use other forms of evidence to discredit this and ignore the scientific evidence. The very act of realizing that you have these hidden biases can enable you to mentally monitor and try to make better any hidden attitudes before they're expressed in your decisions. This can create even minor changes in your behavior, which can be helpful for the overall community. Now let's examine a case of where unconscious biases negatively affected people in society. In the past, orchestras used to be male only. In your groups, take 2 minutes to discuss why is it that you think this happened? What unconscious biases do you think were at play, and how could you potentially eliminate these? Unsurprisingly, when orchestras conducted blind auditions where the musicians sat behind a screen and it wasn't possible to see what they looked like, it became more about the music and less about the person playing it. Subsequently, orchestras have become more gender diverse than ever before. Now take 3 minutes to discuss in your groups what unconscious biases might people have around these 3 individuals. The image of the female in the wheelchair from the previous slide is Tanni Grey-Thompson, who is a Paralympian and an athlete who has won a number of gold and silver medals. We're now going to watch a video of her discussing her experiences of unconscious bias.
My name is Tanni Grey-Thompson. I'm a Paralympian, and I now sit as an independent crossbench peer in the House of Lords, so I'm involved in politics. I was born with spina bifida, and I could walk till I was about 7, and then I became paralysed. My spine collapsed and it severed my spinal cord. And there were loads of people around my parents who told them about all the things I would never do because I was in a wheelchair. So at 7, my parents were told I was never going to go to university, I was never going to get a job, I was never going to get married. You know, I was 7. And my parents didn't believe any of that. They just said that's nonsense. And they brought me up to believe that education was important. And they brought me up to believe that if someone had a problem with me being in a wheelchair, it was their problem, not mine. And this was, years before the social model existed, and my parents were just amazing. They just wanted me to be the best that I could. So I didn't feel disabled. I knew that there were things that were hard for me to do because I was in a wheelchair. If there's a whole pile of steps, that's quite hard. But I didn't feel second class because I was disabled. And then it's only as I got older that I realised actually that's how a lot of disabled people are made to feel, or they're made to feel that they can't do things. And that's a real shame, because actually I grew up thinking I could do anything I wanted. It's in a country where we've got loads of old buildings, still you're kind of sent round the back because that's okay, just to kind of, it's fine if you don't want to use the main entrance. And there still is this sort of slightly patronising tone at times to what we should be grateful for. And actually, I think we should be able to do whatever we want and do it in the same way, but recognise that it's expensive to change some of the things in this country, but that doesn't mean that we have to be grateful. And I think there's still a lot of the attitude towards a lot of disabled people is still that you're brave and marvellous and wonderful. When I was competing, the number of times people say to me, "Oh, that's so brave because you do the marathon." No, I train for it. I train 15, 18 times a week, 50 weeks a year. That's not brave. That's what I do. People who don't know me, I think, have lower expectations of what I can do because I'm in a wheelchair. I'd say, certainly several times a year, if I'm in a shop paying for something, people will say to me, "Put your money back in your purse." Yeah, no, I was going to throw it on the floor. But then if they know me as the Paralympian or as the peer, then I get treated very differently. Right. And actually, what's really hard is that, for some people it is unbelievably difficult to get up, get dressed, get up out of the house in the morning. And for me it's not. But then I think sometimes we're all treated the same, as if, we're kind of brave because we're facing the world. And actually there's a lot of people who don't have a visible disability who find it equally hard to get out of bed in the morning and get up and get dressed and get out. But we're not great at recognising what it takes people to achieve different things.
As we come to the end of this week's Whole School Assembly, I would like each of you to consider, what are your biases? In what ways do you potentially treat people differently? What is this based on? Is it based on their appearance, their gender, their race? And if you know you're doing this and you can become more aware of your unconscious bias, what could you do differently?